Hello and welcome to Enchantment of Eternity's review for The Alternate, which is episode 12 of season 2 of Star Trek Deep Space Nine. This video is a part of a series of videos where I review episodes of Star Trek Deep Space Nine, one episode at a time. In this video, I will cover the second season episode, The Alternate. So The Alternate is the episode in which Odo's, the scientist that studied him when he was first discovered, Dr. Mora Pol, comes on board the station and entices Odo with a trip to the Gamma Quadrant to try to discover his origins, as they think they discovered another species that is similar to him. Him and his assistant and Odo go with Dax into the Gamma Quadrant to discover a life form that seems like it could possibly be related to him, kind of shapeshiftery, but they just beam up a pillar that is there to study it, but as soon as they do, an earthquake happens and it releases these gases which are very toxic to the non-Odo members of the away team, and so they had to be taken back to the station to be looked after. Dax seems to recover very quickly because she's a Trill, but the two Bajorans there are a lot more incapacitated. Meanwhile, O'Brien tries to study the strange entity but doesn't really understand it, and later that night it breaks out of its confinement and they can't find it, and then later it attacks Dr. Bashir as he's treating Mora Pol, and then later they find the weird alien thingy dead. However, that was before the attack on Bashir, so they investigate, and Mora Pol figures out that it is in fact Odo who is doing these weird attacks, and then Dr. Pol confronts Odo and suggests maybe he's been doing this for years, but Odo says it's ridiculous, and Mora Pol says that he shouldn't tell the other members of Starfleet because they'll lock him away, they'll put him in the zoo and they think he's a freak, and insists that Odo go back to his laboratory on Bajor with them. This is when Odo freaks the hell out and turns into the monster and starts attacking him. They didn't come to the conclusion that all these attacks were focused on Mora Pol, that he was the center, and has to do with Odo's grievances towards him, which is why he's been attacking. So they use Mora Pol as bait to lure Odo out and trap him in the force field, and they're able to purge him of all the gas that he encountered on the planet, and thus curing him. And then he apologizes to Dr. Mora Pol and says that he would like to actually remain in touch. So, I can say about this episode, my feelings on this episode quite plainly. The storyline with Dr. Mora Pol I really like. I find very interesting and a good character story for Odo. The storyline with Odo turning into a beast and going around the station going is not good. Not interested in it. Is cliche, and the whole thing with we think we found the changeling is also not good. So I'm kind of split on this episode. So this is, I would say, part 2 of 2, the first episode being Vortex in season 1, of episodes where they're like, oh, Odo, we think we found your origins, and it turns out not to be. Now, anyone watching this with me, although I usually throw out spoilers here and there, and I probably threw out this spoiler before, but just in case you haven't watched Beyond Season 2 and you haven't already heard me spoil this, I'll give you spoilers for what Odo's species really are. But yeah, probably already gave that one away. But anyway, so it's interesting that in season 3 with the episode The Search, when they revealed who Odo's people were, Rene Auberjonois was very much against the idea when he first heard of it. He's like, oh, you can't, give away who Odo's people are and where he comes from, then that takes away the mystery, and then it really takes away from the character, and the character won't be anywhere as interesting. But when they said, no, we're saying that they're going to be the founders of the Dominion, like the driving force of this giant evil empire, and that sold him. He was like, okay, actually that is good. That does make him really interesting, because he's like torn between loyalties, and his people are like these fascist dictators bent on galactic domination. And so, yeah, okay, that works. But the thing is that I disagree with Rene Auberjonois respectfully on this matter, because even if they hadn't come up with something as interesting as the Dominion, the founders of the Dominion, I still say they definitely should have revealed Odo's origins, because instead we keep getting these stupid episodes like this one and Vortex, where it's, oh, we think we found your origins, and oh, turns out we haven't found them. This is very similar to the cliche over on Voyager that Rick Berman and Jerry Taylor and several other producers on Voyager spoke out as like a fault of Voyager that happened in earlier seasons that they tried to avoid in later seasons. And that is the whole, oh, we found the way home, we're going to get home, and then, oh no, it didn't work out, we're not going home, that cliche. To me, this is the same thing. It's the same of like, oh no, we're going to get your hopes up, oh, we haven't done it. And it's like, when you do that cliche too many times, it comes off as uninteresting, because you know that's not going to deliver on its premise. So what the fuck are you even having that premise in the first place if the entire audience knows you're not going to deliver on it? Now, the thing with Odo never got as bad, because they only, as I said, they only got in 2 episodes. But I don't like those 2 episodes because of that. Particularly, I think this one being the second episode is worse, because, okay, you can do it for 1 episode, but when you do it again, then it's a cliche. Now you're just repeating it, and then it becomes a running thing. Now, granted, it would have been worse if they kept doing it, and thankfully, which is why I think Rene Auberjonois is wrong, regardless of what the twist was, they needed to reveal this in season 3, because they shouldn't keep doing it. In fact, if it wasn't tied into Dominion, I would have said that they should have done it in season 2. They should have done it like in this episode. But because they didn't reveal the Dominion, they were waiting to reveal the Dominion until the end of season 2. And because Odo's origins was tied into the Dominion, then okay, fair enough. I see why they pushed it back to season 3, and I'm okay. I'll give them a pass. But had they pushed it off any further, it just would have been frustrating. It just would have been terrible. So I'm so glad that they didn't. But that really makes this episode stand out as just a waste of time. As, oh, we found your origins. Oh, and they play it off like it's another life form that's similar to him, another shapeshifter that's going around attacking people, but it turns out, oh, it was Odo all along. And that's dumb. Like, to me, that's, oh, it's just Odo. It's just some gosh is making him crazy and making him turn into a monster. Yeah, that's fucking stupid. Like, that's the kind of cliche we see happen on Star Trek all of the damn time. So that makes it, to me, is like this episode was promising something really, really interesting, and instead delivered in something that was cliche, boring, and typical. And again, I'm just talking about the whole Changeling storyline. When we get to the Mora Pol storyline, that's different. That's actually a good character story. But as far as the main threat, the main plot, it was a massive disappointment. It was just another one of those, oh, we found your origins. Haha, psych, it's not his origins. Cliche. Don't. Like, it's just a cliche if you're doing it the second time. So anyway, I will say, another episode coming up in season 2 that I'm actually looking forward to. I actually think I like this episode a lot better than most people do. Shadow Play is when we get our third mention of the Dominion, third and final as far as I'm concerned, before they actually appear in the season 2 finale. And we also get a mention of changelings in that episode as well. And changelings, I believe, the term changeling, I think, was first said in Vortex. And I'm pretty sure we didn't get another mention of that actual word changeling. You notice how, in modern times, like in retrospect after Deep Space Nine finished, when people ask what species is Odo, people will say changeling. However, if you notice in the first 2 seasons, they refer to him as a shapeshifter, because the term changeling is actually the official term of what the founders refer to themselves are, and is what is actually etched in a lot of mythology in the Gamma Quadrant. But before they discovered the Gamma Quadrant, they didn't use the word changeling, they just used the word shapeshifter. So, Power Play, not Power Play, that's the TNG one. Shadow Play is the second episode that uses the term changeling. But of course, I'll talk about that more when I talk about Shadow Play. The point is that both those episodes kind of reinforce that there's a mythology around changelings, and as we'll learn, and I think they'll explain this in the search and other episodes in season 3, is that the changelings became refugees and wanderers, and would go to they didn't have a home, and they would go to other planets to try to find a home, and people would fear them because they can change shape, and so they would be persecuted, hunted, mistreated, that is a storyline that makes sense of refugees being hated and mistreated and feared. All too relevant of a story, but anyway, so it makes sense. And because they were so hated and so feared, they created their own empire and genetically engineered soldiers and diplomats in order to conquer all the solids, so that they could not didn't need to fear them anymore. And as I said, as we'll see in Shadow Play, that there's legends and stuff on some of the Gamma Quadrant worlds where the changelings had visited in the past. Now, there's a line in season 4 where Yoon says that the Dominion has existed for like 50,000 years or something like that, and I talked about that when I reviewed that episode To the Death. And I also mentioned how I have to disregard that from canon and say that's just a stupid. Maybe Wayne was just lying or bluffing, because that doesn't actually make sense when you input it, because people wouldn't have this mythology from that fucking longer. Like, that's longer than the human race has been around. I believe. Someone can correct me on this if I'm wrong. But that's ridiculous. So I would like to think that it's actually more along the lines of just a couple thousand years, like 1,000 or 2,000 years ago, like somewhat recent. Because it does sound recent the way they talk about it in the mythology, and how people still use the word changelings and act like they know what a changeling is. So I would say 1,000 years, 2,000 at the most, maybe even a couple hundred years ago, although, yeah, maybe 500 or 600 years, because at this stage, 600 years ago was the 18th century. So, it could have been the 18th century ago. I mean, humans hadn't even reached the freaking, well, I think they had reached the industrial age, but they hadn't reached outer space travel. Not even around their own damn planet. So yeah, not 50,000 years ago, 50 or 500,000, whatever ridiculous number Wayne gave. Maybe 600 years. I think that would, because it seems to be that recent. Although maybe to have mythology, maybe it needs to be older than 600 years, or maybe 1,000. I don't know. I'm splitting hairs. Point is, and I'm talking about other episodes, but let me bring it back to this episode. The point is that I think that this planet is and I think the showrunners are trying to imply this too, that this planet they go to in this episode is the original homeworld of the Changelings. And part of why I say that is because they have that pillar in there with the markings. And apparently, in the episode The Search, when they go to the Changelings' homeworld, or their new homeworld, that pillar is there, that exact same pillar. So I didn't notice that. I read that in Memory Alpha, and I'll have to keep an eye out for it when I rewatch The Search. But that, to me, because I was already wondering before I found out that tidbit if this was meant to be the Founders' or the Changelings' actual original homeworld. And hearing that makes me think, oh, it definitely is. Now, has the Changelings said themselves, and all the other mythology also reinforces, is that the Changelings were refugees and were wanderers, were going to places, different worlds, looking for handouts and looking for a home and looking for help, and they were being persecuted and attacked and treated viciously. So that implies that they had to leave their homeworld. So that the world that we see them in The Search is not their original homeworld, that they settled there later. And as we see, they don't have attachment to it because they abandoned it later in season 3 to trick the Cardassian and Romulan fleets in order to destroy them. They just abandon their whole homeworld and just find a new one. So it does reinforce the fact that that's not their original homeworld. I think this is. And as we see how this gas affects Odo, it kind of makes sense why they abandoned it. If it turns them all into crazy monsters, or maybe it just kills them eventually and it has this really bad side effect and something happened, and that would make sense why there's another life form that's kind of similar to them and different. It's kind of like, our version of chimpanzees or apes, it's a different lower life form that's kind of similar to them, and that there's maybe even more life forms similar to that on that planet that evolved, or maybe most of them died off at this stage because the planet's no longer habitable. Maybe this is one of the more resilient ones. Not that resilient because it dies right away, but maybe it needs to be on that planet. Maybe because they removed it from the planet, took it into a sterile environment, that's part of the reason why it died right away. So that's my guess. My guess is that this is, and I think this is what they're trying to imply by having this pillar over in The Search, that this is the original homeworld. Or maybe, I don't know, you could say it's just another planet that the Changelings settled, but I think it's their homeworld if there's another life form on it that's similar to them. That makes me think that the life forms all evolved in that, but the planet sort of became hostile to that kind of life. That's mostly headcanon, but it makes a lot of sense to me, so I that's what I'm going with. Now, speaking of the pillar, I got to bring up the fact that they just beam it away. It's funny, I was listening to the podcast Delta Flyers with Tom and Harry, and I believe it was Terry Farrell was on that one. And they were all really going hard out, complaining about the fact that they just beamed the pillar, this artifact. Let's just beam it on board. Why didn't they just take pictures of it? That does seem, and it seems like other Star Trek episodes, and this could be a side effect of it being made in the 90s, where this wasn't really in conscious mind, is that they are okay with stealing artifacts from other planets and just stealing their heritage, and let's throw this in the museum on Earth, and granted, there's no, like, as far as they know, sentient species that are still on this planet, but still, you just don't go like beaming artifacts without it, like. And then, like, the earthquake happens as soon as they beam it out. So that seems to me to imply it's because they beamed it out, which also makes it seem like that was such a stupid thing. And Dax should know better. Like, is this how Starfleet operates? To just go stealing random artifacts they find on alien worlds and the fucking Gamma Quadrant that they know nothing about? Anyway. Before I get into the Mora Pol stuff, well, I guess I should stay on the whole Odo turning into a monster thing, which I don't really have much to say about that. It's just a cliche that's trying to do it like a horror, like, it's a monster attacking, and I don't care. I mean, I typically don't like horror, but there's some horror episodes of TNG I find significantly creepy that I do like Night Terrors is creepy. Phantasms, I think, is really creepy. Even Timescape is not supposed to be horror, but that's creepy. It's eerie. This is just like your monster movie, rawr, rawr, and I just don't find it interesting at all. I don't find it scary at all. I don't find it creepy. And the revelation that Odo is the monster is, to me, that just brought the whole episode down for me. I'm like, really? Odo's has some gas and he's poisoned and turned him into this monster. That's just like... so typical. And plus it was a fake out. Because they want you to believe it was this alien that they found, which, this is so interesting. There's another alien shapeshifter that's kind of like Odo, but it's more vicious and more like a monster. How are they going to relate this? How are they going to tie this? What interesting character story is Odo going to have trying to relate to this thing? No. The alien they found from the Gamma Quadrant was just some fragile piece of shit that just died immediately, and it's actually Odo who's being the monster. Well, why do I care about it? And the answer is I don't care about it. Now, they do try to tie it into Dr. Moore's storyline by saying, Odo is going after him. But it's not like, they don't need this for Dr. Mora Pol's storyline. The Odo and Mora Pol storyline. It doesn't need it. Anyway, I mean, that's all I gotta say about that. It's not good. I don't know what else you want me to say. It sucks. It's not interesting. So then we get the scene at the start of the episode, which I really like, where Quark it starts like out the episode where Quark is selling the little discs of the Ferengi dead people, something that they established in the episode The Nagus in season 1, so I'm like, they're sticking with this theme. And I thought it was really interesting how Odo goes up and it's like, I'm interested in your Ferengi death rituals. And he's kind of mocking at first, but then he like brings out the Latinum and like shows it to Quark, and Quark's like, you're serious? And Odo's like, hey, you ever know me not to be? And so Quark goes to like take it, and he's like, how do I know that's really plague? And it's like, what? There's a letter of authenticity. Or a seal or whatever. And Odo's like, well, how can that be plague if he's still alive? Still alive? Still alive. Quark's like instant. It's like, Odo, I'm a victim too. I thought he was alive. And so that was actually really interesting. But the episode never revealed whether or not Quark was lying or if he was actually conned, if he was the one that was swindled. The one line I left out that I thought was hilarious was when Odo was like, I tracked down Plague, whatever his name was, Plague, it was Plaque or something. I tracked him down on the planet and I told him about your little scheme. He was quite amused. I'm not. Alright, here's the thing. like Armin Shimmerman and Renee Auberjonois throughout the years, even when the show was airing, after it aired, throughout the decades, they would claim that, everyone talks about me, Quark and Odo's relationship, but we actually didn't have that many scenes together. And I kept thinking, we should have some more scenes together. We don't really actually work with each other that much. And I always called bullshit on that. Like, I was like, but that's not true. They have tons of scenes together. Like, if you take any two characters, like, Sisko and Dax, or Bashir and O'Brien, or, any other two characters and sort of match them together, Bashir and Garrick, these two appear actually more, they have more on time, one-on-one screen time than any other pairing in Deep Space Nine. So I always found that to be false. And I was listening to the Delta Flies podcast with Armin Shimmerman, and he came to the same conclusion after watching the show. He's like, I always used to say that, and Renee used to say this as well, that we never had any screen time together, but after watching the show and going through the episodes, I find that's really not true. We actually had tons of screen time together. And I'm like, thank you. Thank you. And it's funny because they never really watched the show. I don't think either one of them, most of the actors don't really watch the show on a regular basis. And so they're just going off of what they filmed. And for whatever reason, they have more memories. I think part of it might be is that the filming the scenes with Quark and Odo are always very simple scenes of just them standing there talking to each other, so they probably don't take as long as to shoot as some of the more complex scenes with like special effects or action or multiple characters moving around. And so they might spend more time with those other actors and less time with each other because it doesn't take as long to film those scenes. But they actually take up more screen time when you're watching the episode. And so if you're judging it by the screen time you see on screen, they actually do appear a hell of a lot more probably than any other two characters. Anyway, that is a big aside because he didn't even say it about this episode, but I was reminded of it because this is one of the better. There's a lot of good, like a lot of juicy Quark and Odo scenes, and I'll have to see how I feel when we get to the later seasons, but I actually think this is one of the few things that I actually think worked better in the earlier seasons. Pretty much everything else worked better in the later seasons, but this might be like, I don't know, I think maybe it always stayed true, but I think it wasn't as consistently good. I'm thinking of the episode Ascent, which sucked. But maybe, I'm sure there's other great, Quark and Odo interactions in later seasons too, but I just think there's more of them. I think it was just consistently better in the earlier seasons, but we'll see how I feel about this when we get to the later seasons. Okay, so now let's get to the Mora Pol stuff. So, this was mentioned, he was first mentioned, I believe, in the episode The Forsaken. It's a shitty episode, but they did give some interesting backstory into Odo's background. And he said that because the Loxana asked him specifically about his hair, and Odo said that he just mimicked the Bajoran scientist that was studying him. So they stayed true to that, and the guy had the same hairdo as Odo. Now, apparently the original idea was to actually have Renee Auberjonois play Mora Pol. But they decided not to do that, or it was completely impractical because of the makeup. He would have to get into Odo makeup and then Mora Pol makeup, and it would take way too long, and it would make their shooting days be like 14 days, where they each episode had a 7-day limit. So it's double the limit. So they're like, no, we can't do it. So they just hired another actor to play him, and thank God. I mean, I love Renee Auberjonois. He's a great actor, nothing against him. I just hate the cliche that, like, the way they already did with Data, and they'll do it again with the Doctor and Voyager, and I'm glad they didn't do it with Odo. It's just a cliche. And quite frankly, I didn't like the fact that they did it with the Doctor and Voyager, but I'll cover that when I get to that. Plus, they can't fucking remain consistent because the fucking Doctor, or, not Doctor, it was Zimmerman, was freaking, looked just like the Doctor around the same age in the earlier seasons. And then in the later seasons, all of a sudden, he's like a super old man. He aged like 60 years within the span of 2 years. But anyway, that's another story that I'll get to when I get to Voyager. But the point is, I'm glad that they didn't do this. And plus, the fact that they got such a good actor. Good old James Sloyan, which I did put in my top 10 best guest actors list that I did. I can't remember for which performance. I'm pretty sure it was the Defector. If it wasn't the Defector, it would have been Detrell, which are both like two of my favorite performers. He does an amazing job. Maybe it was the Defector, actually. He does an amazing job on both of those. And we'll actually see him later on, pretty soon, in the episode Firstborn, playing, spoilers, a future version of Alexander. And of course, he also appears again one more time as Mora Pol. And yeah, I think he's definitely one of the best guest actors Star Trek franchise ever had. There was even like a Facebook post that was, who are your favorite, guest actors? And I put James Sloyan. Although, the number one best performance is Harris Yulin in Duet, but that's that's something else. James Sloyan, unlike Harris Yulin, appeared several times as different characters, and twice as this character. And yeah, I think that he was definitely great. He's a great actor. He brings so much to the episodes he's in, and this one in particular, like the chemistry, the playoff of Odo, he does such a good job of playing someone who's like acting like he's treating Odo like a son. And I do think that was the direction that he was given, and he does such a good job at it. I will say, though, that this episode is not as good as The Begotten. The other episode Mora Pol appears in is actually a much better episode. Not just because of the side plot with the monster changeling or whatever, but if you're just looking at the Mora Pol and Odo interactions, The Begotten's still the better episode, because I feel like they get more into their history, their backstory, and it was a bit more relatable, and you understand Odo's like sort of childhood anger that he holds on to a bit more and a bit more reasonable, whereas this episode, Odo comes off more as the angsty teenager, like blasting heavy metal music in his room and saying, "Fuck you, Dad!" Like, I think I was mocking him, and the last time I covered this in my season 5 review. "Screw you, Dad! Fuck you, Dad!" And however justified it may be, I just find it really annoying. And as I said in the episode The Begotten, it was actually much better because he didn't really come off this way. But it doesn't come off as annoying, like angsty teenager vibes as it does in this episode. Odo just comes off as unreasonable, as like constantly mocking Mora Pol, and I don't think it's bad characterization for Mora Pol, the fact that he's oblivious to this. He seems to not really realize how much Odo is holding resentment towards him, because I can understand that, because he's kind of blinded by he sees Odo as like this, his mentor, or I'm not mentor, protege, and he's kind of blinded by his like being proud of his surrogate son, and he sees Odo as a surrogate son even though he doesn't admit it. But Odo, there is some interesting nuance to this episode that sort of implies that Odo actually does partly see him as a father, and partly does love him as a father, but that is, that there's all the hatred and resentment he holds towards him for, experimenting on him and causing him pain and just keeping him trapped in the cage and all that resentment that he still has towards him. But I think part of him does look up to him as a father figure, as the person who taught him how to interact with other solids, other humanoids, and how to shapeshift in the first place. And again, we get into a lot more detail on this in The Begotten, so they make it a bit more clear. But even in this episode, I can tell, like, there's certain scenes where, they first get back from the Gamma Quadrant and Mora Pol is seriously injured, and you can tell that Odo is worried about him. You can tell that he's preoccupied. And then Sisko tells the story about, when my father got ill, he looked so fragile. And Odo is like, I appreciate your thoughts, but Dr. Mora Pol's not my father. But that's just him being, like, dismissive, trying to be like, no, I don't care about him. But I think deep down, like, he is trying to deny that he does really care about Mora Pol. And so I think at the end of the episode, he does come to that realization. I think there is this instinctual resentment he holds towards Mora Pol, and he doesn't want Mora Pol to torture this poor new shape-shifting being the way he did for him. It's more of instinctual and sort of subconscious that it is. That's why it sort of manifested itself in the whole monster thing, but he's not consciously aware that he's feeling that way, but they do realize. And I think this is when Mora Pol realizes that that Odo has that resentment towards him. He definitely realizes that at the end of the episode, and he had that nice scene, which I actually do think is kind of good, when they trap the monster Odo in the force field on the promenade, and Mora Pol is just like, what have I done? I did it to you again. I made you a prisoner. You can tell that's his first realization of how he's coming to the realization of how awful it was for Odo to be trapped in the lab, and he's understanding the anger that Odo holds towards him. But as I said, it's not rational. And so when Odo becomes himself again, he's rational again. He's able to put past those, past angst or whatever aside and agree. And they have a nice, bonding moment. And they agree to see each other again. So that, I think that's really nice. It was actually kind of a powerful ending. But, the scene when Mora Pol first figures out that Odo is the monster thingy, I don't know. I found it a bit cheesy the way Mora Pol's like, don't tell Bashir, he's not going to understand. He's just going to know that you're turning into this crazy monster that attacked him. They're going to put you and study you, and they're going to put you in a zoo. And Odo starts freaking out and going, ah! I find that kind of fake. I don't think Mora Pol would be that ignorant of Starfleet and that ignorant of Odo and his position in the station to think that they would actually put him in. That doesn't even make any sense. Why the fuck would they put him in the zoo? I think worst case scenario, they would put him in a laboratory. But even they wouldn't do that, put you in a zoo. What the fuck is that? And Odo definitely should know better. Now, granted, he does say, you don't know these people. But you can tell that he's doubting himself. And you can tell when Mora Pol says, so put you in a zoo, that he's actually, freaking out and scared of it. But, yeah, that's the part I don't buy. I don't buy it. He wouldn't be scared of it. He would know these people better. It wouldn't be like a lame, you don't know these people. He would be like, yeah, you're an idiot. You're full of shit. He would have certainty that he doesn't know what the fuck he's talking about, because clearly he doesn't. And, when he says, come back with me to the laboratory, and that's when Odo starts freaking out, and that's when he turns into a monster. It's I'm not going anywhere with you. That I buy. That does work well. But the part leading up to it, I was just yeah, no. I just didn't like it. I didn't buy it. But anyway, I think that is, pretty much all I got to say about that one. So I'd like to thank my Patreon supporters very much for supporting me on Patreons. Very much appreciated. I would like to give a big special thanks to Jordan Johnson, Brandon Neal Howes, and Antarius. Thank you all so very, very much for your strong support. And I'd also like to give a shout out to Benjamin Mead, Greg Marley, Francisco Chuck Hooks, Kyrie091, Anthony D. Benedictus, Ricky, Matty Jester, Joel Viles, Alessandro Miguelisio, Norman Buckwald, Stephen Kennedy, Brenton Berg, and Allison Fordyce. Thank you all so very, very much for your support. So we do have a few patron comments on this episode. First comment is from Norman Buckwald, who says, 3 I hate you, Dad, out of 10. Thankfully, the will someone think of the children anti-Odo mob was not around this time, considering the Psy twist, which, just like a certain 7th season Voyager episode, erg on the reveal that it's the security officer all along. But at least this one was not a retread, unlike Repression, which made people fondly remember the superior worst case scenario for a Maquis mutiny. The think of the children crowd. That's if in case anyone watching this doesn't get the reference, it's referring to the episode A Man Alone, one of the early episodes of season 1, where there was, the mob that was very cartoonish and silly, and I equated it to a Simpsons. Someone think of the children with Moe there and Barney with their torches. Anyway, thankfully they weren't here. Anyway, next comment is from Benjamin Mead, who says, I like Dr. Mora and his interactions with Odo, but the Begotten did it much better. A monster fest with Odo as the culprit is the less interesting story here compared to its relationship with Dr. Mora. Also, it's kind of confusing exactly what happened to the life form. Did it escape, die, etc.? And how was it escaped related to Odo's transformation? There are some unclear and confusing plot points here. The actor who played Dr. Mora also played other great Trek characters. I like the actor and character a lot. This actor's great. James Sloyan. He's one of the best Star Trek-esque actors, if you ask me. But some of those questions they actually did answer, like how the life form escaped. I believe they even stated it in dialogue that Odo is the one, when he turned to the monster, he went to it and broke it free. So he's the one that broke it free. Although, if you look at the dome, it looks like it was damaged from the inside. So I don't know how Odo managed that. But that's what they're saying, that Odo was the one who broke it free and released it out into the station because he was trying to protect it from Dr. Mora. So he wanted, so instinctually he just hated Mora Pol and thought he's torturous, so was trying to protect this other life form from him. But apparently it just, as I said, it's just like weak and not very good at surviving, and couldn't survive out in the station on its own and died. So, I mean, they weren't very clear on why it died, which is why I say it's weak. But they did. That's pretty much what they were saying there. Anyway, next comment is from Antarius, who says, I really like how the episode explored the relationship between Odo and Dr. Mora. There are some very intense moments between them. Most of the other aspects of the episode were more or less unsatisfactory. The search for Odo's origins leads nowhere and is abandoned midway in the episode. Instead, we get a stupid storyline about Odo changing into a monster. My rating is a 5 out of 10. Now that is definitely a really, really good point, that the origin storyline, as I said, it was a fake out, but they didn't even play it out towards the end of the episode. They just, like, the whole episode was predicated on Mora Pol saying, "Oh, I might know your origins," and then it's completely forgotten about halfway through the episode, so just fizzles out. Alright, next comment is from Stephen Kennedy, who says, a murder mystery type episode without a murderer. Without a murder. Not without a murderer, without a murder. Unless you consider Odo Jr. being murdered by evil Odo. The female changeling would have loved this version of Odo. When this episode was almost over, I kept saying this story makes no sense, so it has to be a Joe Menosky script. I was gutted to find out he didn't write this. I was like Bashir, as he didn't even know what happened with Odo. Maybe the writers of this episode added a line from Bashir because they didn't know either. When I originally watched Deep Space Nine, I didn't like that Odo's people were were the Dominion. Fast forward to the end of the show, the writers of Deep Space Nine actually made it work, so it never bothers me now. Bashir goes back to his old ways regarding Jadzia, so my rating is 5. When Sisko tells Odo the story about his father, Sisko seems to imply, without actually saying it, that his father had passed away after becoming ill. At least they mentioned that in Homefront out of 10. I read this in Memory Alpha too. They were saying the same thing, but I never interpreted it that way. I never got the impression that Sisko was saying that his father died. I think I might have gotten that impression the first time I saw it, but he never states it. Like, he doesn't actually imply that his father died. I think that's people just kind of reading it, putting their own stuff into it, and myself included, so it's probably a natural conclusion, but they never actually imply it. So I don't think it contradicts anything to have his father alive, but that is just my humble opinion on that one. I love the fact, always loved it from the very beginning, that Odo's people were the founders. I thought that was actually, again, it brings up this really great dynamic with Odo having to choose between loyalty of his people, who are like fascist dictators bent on galactic domination, and the people that he knows and loves, and how that puts him in conflict. And I think I was always fascinated by that dynamic from the very beginning. So yeah, I always liked that, but that is just me. Anyway, next comment is from Ricky, who says, this episode was actually okay. I think this was a much, much better father-son type episode than the god-awful episode in the second season of TNG with Riker and his father. And I love the actor for Dr. Mora, who was the defector in TNG, and his best role will be on Voyager's first season, Detrell. I really like the interactions with Odo and him. I also like it that he doesn't come off as an antagonist or arrogant like most fathers are on TV. But the part where Odo becomes a monster for a brief period was cheesy, and thankfully it didn't last long. So like this episode, so my rating is a 7 out of 10. I think James Sloan does a really amazing job of making Mora Pol come off as not like cheesy, despicable, arrogant, sleazy like Riker's father did, and like a lot of TV fathers do. He didn't come off that way. He came off as a lot more understandable and a lot more likable, but at the same time, you could understand Odo's angst and anger towards him. And so he walked that line like really well, I think, where he's not too arrogant, despicable, but again, you could understand how he could have been a despicable father in the past. It was really great performance, great nuanced performance, definitely a highlight of the episode. I never even thought of comparing it to the Icarus Factor, because that episode's just a piece of shit, like, flat out. But yeah, when you think about it, like, as much as I complain about Odo doing the "fuck you, Dad," he doesn't do it nearly as bad as Riker did in that episode. In that episode, Riker was insufferable. His father was insufferable. Everyone was freaking insufferable. Especially John Tesh, who was fucking hitting Worf with the pain stick. Yeah, so thank you so much, patrons, for your comments. So my rating for the alternate out of 10 is going to be a 6 good. So notice the Patreon comments seem to be a little bit all over the place with the ratings. I think Stephen Kennedy and Antarius gave it a 5. Norman Buckwolf was lower with the 3, and Ricky was highest with the 7. So I'm higher than Antarius, Stephen Kennedy, and Norman Buckwolf, but not quite as high as Ricky. Because I think the Mora Pol and James Sloan's performance does save this episode a lot. Even though it's not the better Mora Pol episode, the Begotten is better. Like, I agree with people on that one. But it was still handled fairly well. Like, interesting enough for me to give this episode a positive rating. Because, as I said, there was a lot of nuance. Like, even not just James Sloan's performance, but also Renee Auberjonois' performance. Because, as I said, there were moments where you could tell Odo, as much as he was denying it, did actually care about Mora Pol, and I think he was denying it to himself, but you could tell that with, like, his glances to him while he's injured and stuff like that, and there's, like, moments in there. So it's a really great performance overall, and the chemistry does work. But yeah, the whole setup of "we found your origins," not really, kind of tanks the episode. And that, and the fact that they abandoned it, and the whole thing with this new changeling creature just dies immediately, and instead becomes about Odo turning into a scary monster. Like, I can see why people would give this episode a negative rating because of that, because those are horrible elements. This is what I said from the very beginning at the start of my review. The Mora Pol Odo relationship was great. The storyline about Odo turning into a monster and then trying to find the origins was crap. So it is kind of mixed. So it would sort of land in that middle for me, either a 5 or a 6. But I think the acting is so good between Mora Pol and Odo, and the chemistry between these characters is so great, I had to give it the benefit of the doubt and give it the positive side of that. So a 6 out of 10 for me. So that is it for my review of The Alternate. If you enjoyed this video, please be sure to leave a like, leave a comment. What do you think about this episode? Am I being too generous to it? Am I not being generous enough? Yeah, just let me know what you think in the comment section below. And also, if you'd really like to support my channel, you can support me on Patreon if you are so inclined. There's a link in the description below. There's different tiers, different levels. There's different rewards, such as you can make comments for me to read my videos. I could do pre-releases 2 weeks in advance, certain videos, and well, pretty much all my Star Trek reviews. And yeah, you can request a video for me to do. I have a Patreon-only series where I make revisited videos, so revisiting reviews that I've already made exclusively for Patreon supporters. Starting, well, the $1 level will get one per month, but the $3 level gets all of them, which sometimes it varies how many I do per month. Sometimes it is just one, but sometimes usually it's more than one. Usually it's 3 or 4. So $3 level will get you access to all of them. But yeah, that's Patreon if you are so inclined to check it out. But if not, that's all good too. If you still want to support the channel, leaving a like, subscribing, commenting, all that stuff really is still very much appreciated and does help me out a lot. So let's get to what's coming up next on the old the old channel here, as the list takes forever to load. Okay, so Wednesday will be my review for Homeward. Great TNG episodes, so looking forward. One of my favorites. Yeah, I do like it better than most people, as I do with Season 7 of TNG as a whole. Thursday will be my review of Lower Decks Season 5, Episode 8. Saturday, I'll be over on Patreon to revisit my review for an episode of TNG that is not so good. In fact, I called it the worst episode of TNG, and that is Sub Rosa. We'll be revisiting my review for that episode, so be sure to dinner light the candle. And then on Monday, back here on the main channel for another public review, reviewing the Armageddon game. So that's what's coming up on my channel. Be sure to subscribe to keep up with all this reviews as I continue to cover Star Trek Next Generation and Star Trek Deep Space Nine and Star Trek Lower Decks and many other shows. So be sure to subscribe so you can keep up with all of that. And thanks a lot for watching.